We also saw a brand new podcast from MrBeast as he looks back on filming Beast Games. The podcast was from Colin and Sam, and they were talking about the fact that Jimmy had shown a handful of times on the show before, and were talking about a lot of mainstream public controversies and how they wanted to handle it. They weren't 100% sure because, of course, they are friends with Jimmy, and they weren't really sure how to whether to discuss them, how to discuss them, how to do that best, because they didn't want to, from what it sounded like from the podcast, they didn't want to jeopardize or put into vulnerability the relationship they have with Jimmy, right? They've just done, or they had done when MrBeast came out, and did all the filming for Beast Games. He invited them to create a BTS video that we've talked about previously. But this was this was filmed just before Beast Games came out, so they were able to talk about quite a lot of things, but they didn't really get into the controversies, and it seems like MrBeast is trying to move on from those, and there hasn't really been many updates in regards to those lawsuits we previously had in conversation as well. The fact that they weren't 100% sure how the best to talk about it, as they were Jimmy's friends, and of course they showed and had him on the show so many times. They also claimed that this product was a very difficult conversation, and this conversation is a very different conversation, and this conversation is more about the future for MrBeast specifically. As I said, it's him about specifically looking to move past the controversy and the issues and the also the debunkedness that we saw from Doug Pact as well in that respect. And we found that in the podcast episode that it was more around advanced creators, or the creators who are building businesses for and are closer to entrepreneurs. Of course, they'll also be talking about the games themselves. I found it very interesting that over 5 episodes to be able to quote 19 people of 400 in the same business. So this was talking about the fact that in the time they've had MrBeast on their podcast and they've done 5 interviews with him, that his company has grown from 19 people up to 400. And quote, how does he go from creating YouTube videos to now creating a reality TV show? And the fact that how he's transitioning from creating just YouTube videos or just YouTube video, these larger budget YouTube videos, and is now working with TV producers to make a Amazon Prime, Netflix or equivalent show. Jimmy was also asked how he felt about Beast Games and how it was going to do. He believes that it's going to do really well. Jimmy did share a story with where he shared the first episode with Casey, being Casey Neistat, and Casey said and watched it with his friends, and nearly all the same. And there were a lot of conversation between Casey and his family and his kids as well. Said about what is going to happen, or even the next morning. So yes, Casey thought it would do well because there was a lot of conversation about some of the stories, and Jimmy was really happy with some of the storytelling elements later on in MrBeast Games episodes, so 5, 6, and towards the end of the series. But his concern was maybe having 1,000. The spectacle is of course really great for the game show as a whole, but the question was, is that harder to really build those depth connections and be able to story tell with those people? And there was a little bit later on in the podcast, they talked about the fact that traditional telly will have 10,000, maybe even 100,000 on things like Pop Idol, where they'll bring a large number of people, but they will only show on camera maybe 100 or so, and then they'll dwindle very quickly, very early in that series. They'll dwindle it down to what they believe is going to be the best 20 or maybe the best 30 stories from all of those people. So Jimmy did explain that he's potentially going to look at the feedback for Series 2 and Series 3 from Series 1 to see whether he does something similar or whether he just scales it back in regards to the number, but then can go more into depth with those characters or with those contestants specifically, and taking the audience on the journey as well. They led on to talking about the fact that it wouldn't be bad timing if Jimmy was known as just a YouTuber. He feels that a few years ago he was creating content that just, quote, manipulated the algorithm, end quote, and getting viewers when he wants to become a better storyteller. They have also talked about the fact many times of how behaviors have changed when it comes to watching YouTube or versus watching streaming platforms. This is mostly around the fact that they talked a lot about Jimmy having to beg or having to really promise that the connection on YouTube is what you say in the title and thumbnail. So you have more freedom and you can be a bit looser on the edit. You don't have to be so aggressive with the retention edit because it's on streaming platforms, because people are more likely to be in a position where they're going to be sat in front of the telly and they're going to be there for an extended period of time, when YouTube is a more click away, kind of go through videos quickly, not invest a huge amount of time necessarily into watching content, or the content has to work harder to win over that audience member. When Jimmy said he, quote, has watched hours of content, and then if he has an hour to watch content, then he'll go to YouTube. When he doesn't have anything to do all day, he'll go to a streaming platform. They then moved on to talk about the role that collective conversation can have when it comes to a TV show being released weekly. Of course, you could do a weekly show on YouTube, but this is going to not work as well due to the fact that YouTube runs a recommend algorithm, and they were talking about the fact that, for example, some people could have the wrong episodes or the non-chronological episodes being recommended to them. So, for example, if you had a 5-series or 5-episode video series, then the question or the concern would be someone could get recommended episode 5 before watching episode 1, 2 or 3, and they're not going to necessarily have that level of investment in a similar way as a natural platform difference when you're talking about a streaming platform, because people will naturally start at episode 1 and then move further forward in that series, obviously, when you're watching TV. So that was his main concern. But he also talked about there's a lot of culture related to having weekly TV shows in regards to that communication and that conversation on social media after the fact about what happened. We saw this, some more examples could be when Game of Thrones was one that jumps to mind, for example, where there was a lot of conversation and a lot of people have said that Series 8, for example, wasn't a very good ending. Other people have said it's really great. So in that respect, it does cause a lot of marketing and it can cause a lot of hype because there is a lot of conversation online, but it also, of course, brings that question of spoilers and etc. When it comes to those episodes. So there is, a culture talk conversation related to, do you stay clear of social media if you haven't watched it? And we've seen it with other IPs as well. They then talked a little bit about the game specifically, and how they were looking to market the games, and that marketing plan is unlike a YouTube video. As on a YouTube video, you can create a good title and a good thumbnail and then be able to grow or market it in that way. However, they used more older school marketing channels to market the TV show. They talked about the fact that they needed to market it more as an event, so it was dropping at a specific time. They also talked about the fact that to end each episode on a huge cliffhanger. So, of course, how we're looking to maybe hit a button or win $1 million. So they did talk about one of the episodes where there was this drastic cliffhanger towards, I think it was episode 3, episode 4, and how they deliberately designed the edit so that there was a cliffhanger, so you were going to come back next week. This is very traditionally used in TV to hook you into going, oh my god, I want to know what happens. They use this in, of course, TV dramas a lot to install the fact that you'll come back for the next episode that is likely in a weekly distribution. But of course, they did talk about the benefits of having a bingeable show. There is some strategies that some larger corporations like the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, the more traditional television stations have used to just release it all, and of course Netflix as well and other streaming platforms have used it sometimes as a bingeable show. And it's kind of what do you choose to use? Do you want it more as an event, or do you want it as we're going to market it and then we're going to have it as a archive or a set of archived content to then be in a position where you can showcase or highlight the fact that people can watch obviously all those episodes? And do you necessarily need cliffhangers, or not. They then moved on to talk about Jimmy's specific businesses and how and the question of whether the game specifically fit into the overarching MrBeast business. He did talk about some main points he wanted to focus on. Point A being his studio, so his content, his YouTube, and then obviously his them becoming TV show. His B, his CPG or consumer packaged goods, so this would be Lunchly and Feastables and things like that. And then we also had the digital software side. He does run a YouTube TubeBuddy and kind of video-esque service called ViewStats specifically. So he's tried to build more on the digital side and focus on that because more of his viewers will be able to use that platform or that system, because not everyone can necessarily buy Feastables, because if you're not in the US you won't be able to buy Feastables. Then they moved on to talking about the fact that Jimmy is aware that some people who are going to watch streaming or TikTok, for example, are solely just going to watch on that platform. So creating the best content you can for each is going to allow you to move forward. Also showing how linking in to those CPG, consumer packaged goods products, and the digital products as well. Then they go into the fact that one of Jimmy's main things that he's trying to do with Feastables is to quote to end child poverty, but to quote Jimmy specifically, over 1 million kids in child poverty in West Africa on cocoa farms. So how much he found out was due to the fact that he was running a chocolate company. Of course, he wanted to do it right. In answer to where does this fit in regards to Jimmy, what Jimmy's trying to do is he wants to be a net good in the world, leading into sharing what specifically motivates him. He explains that humans can be motivated by multiple different things, and also maybe sometimes it's money, but also it may be other things. One of the reasons for him is he loves building businesses and he personally finds it really fun. He also believes that he can fix larger problems in the world that the world faces and be able to live without regret when he's older. When questioned about most larger businesses giving a level of bad press, he doesn't want to necessarily show or articulate, because the question came and they were asking, they were showing Jimmy or using the analogy that he was going to become a large corporate and he was going to become like Coca-Cola in that respect. And the question was that, you know, he can do it all. He can be in a position where he can morally source. He can do things what he would count as correctly or doing good in the world. And he just simply answered, you know, his actions will speak louder than words specifically. So I guess that would say look at his actions through his companies to be then judge whether he's a large, a horrible or a not very morally acceptable corporation, and whether he's moving in the correct direction there. When asked about how he's going to fix children being used to gather cocoa, he explained that it's purely down to how much the chocolate business pays each farmer, due to the fact that they can't afford to pay anyone over the age of 18, followed by then going into detail on how they're planning to pay more, even though, yes, it's about paying them a living wage and working with businesses to ensure that's going to help the longer term sustainability of that farm, and making sure they're being paid a fair rate specifically. But also he's trying, and as he becomes more and more profitable at scale, he wants to hopefully help or inspire, or being in a position where he can help the larger chocolate companies to be able to ethically source as well. Where he then goes into his mission to show all of the larger chocolate companies how to be able to scale size without necessarily using child labor, and the other businesses will hopefully change their ways. He was and asked how he's learned about scaling out a business and a team, not only on his YouTube channel but also in his businesses, and his answer simply was, it's very hard. and how he can understand how a lot of YouTubers are looking to launch and run a product, but the challenges that come with living in a launch style hype is keeping that sustained revenue, keeping that sustained demand throughout, because he was talking about the fact that actually you as a YouTuber, as a creator, it's a focus because you're competing against people who have been doing product for 30 years who are going to be better than it. So actually a better opportunity for a creator who wants to create a sweets brand, wants to create a chocolate brand, wants to create those kind of things, would be to work with someone who knows what they're doing on the product side, and then you handle, as a creator, you handle the marketing, you handle the hype, and then you build it that way. But he also talked about being concerned related to how a lot of creators want to create their own brand when it can take a lot of time, energy and resources, but also may not have the sustainability, and it could hurt their brand in the long term, when actually it could be a better use of time and energy to double down and focus on the content that you're creating and being able to be in a position where you can just do a brand deal, make the money, then either reinvest that into the content to create better content that then in turn allows you to grow the audience and keep your audience happy on YouTube, and then be able to highlight and showcase what you can do better, rather than I guess the conversation would be around being in that shiny syndrome or that new thing syndrome point of view in that respect as well. We also talked about the details on, because a lot of creators do want to get that exit and do want to buy or be bought out by for 10 million, for example, or 100 million, or etc. And he explained the only reason why a company or a business is going to, quote, buy you out is because you have that sustained revenue, because you've proven over the extended period of time that you're in a position where you can grow a sustainable business that has revenue coming in every single month, that ideally is growing, hence why they will then look to purchase it, because then they can be in a position, it's not stagnating, it's constantly growing. So then they could be in a position where not only do they make their money back, but also they can be in a position where they make their money back quickly, and then they have basically an infinite profit gain just by having a shareholding or owning that company specifically. Hence why a lot of cash flow businesses are sold in this way. They then went on to talk about the advice that Jimmy would have when it comes to, firstly, streaming platforms when looking to negotiate more deals. And he wants to be a kind of the first of many, hopefully, of creators who are able to do reality TV shows with people like Prime. But also the question as well, or the conversation related to giving the streaming platform some feedback on how to negotiate that, and some of the education and some of the you could say the annoyances that he found when negotiating the deal with Prime for Beast Games. But he also explained that you should bring in, and his recommendation would be for creators to bring in a expert who has done and who has, been in the weeds and done hundreds of these deals with these streaming platforms, to ensure that they don't have bigger headaches or bigger challenges moving forward. Things like making sure who owns the show's IP, making sure that there's lots of, the details of the contract aren't quote unquote predatory, or in a position where it's a good split, or it's a fair balance in respect to that, and actually getting the best out of the opportunity or the deal in that respect as well. They then moved on to talk about specifically the stuff that Dude Perfect is doing, and obviously the Sidemen team are doing with Side Plus, and launching an app and creating a subscription model, or for their fans to pay into, and creating that model solely from their audience. And whether Jimmy thought that would be a good idea for a lot of creators to do. He personally said he thinks that is a good idea within reason. He personally can't do it at the moment because of how much he is doing and how much bandwidth he currently has with all of the companies he runs, and obviously what he's doing with a lot of the filming and the processes and team and etc. that he's doing with the studio, but also with his CPG products, but also of course the stuff he's doing with software as well. They then talked about the fact that how would he deem Beast Games to be ROI positive, because there's a lot of conversations and a lot of questions, and when you do things in business, of course, you're looking how does that return on investment really come back to you in a benefit way. And Jimmy said, to be honest, it's not going to return the money in Series 1, but what he does hope is it proves a proof of concept, and Jimmy hopes that he is able to break even on Series 2 and Series 3. Jimmy wants to make sure that people first watch the show and then, of course, enjoy it, and also those who do watch the show want to have an emotional connection for those taking part in the show. So that's kind of what I was alluding to before about later on in the series. He was really focused and really wanted to create those stories and really show that character development in the game show with those contestants specifically. He also said creating the biggest game show ever in the world, and not to be Never the Beast Games level. He also thought that, and it was interesting to see how his thoughts on this had changed in regards to from when they first interviewed him about this to now. He's talked about the fact that he would love to win an Emmy, and he would be in a position where, along with those world records that he's already got, because he knows that some of the members of the team that worked with him on Beast Games, in that respect, their dream is to win an Emmy or have some work related to being winning an Emmy. So that's one of the focuses that he has, and he hopes that he can, and he also feels, I think, that it would legitimize a lot of what he's doing, so he's not only a YouTuber, even though of course he loves the fact that he is, and he loves the fact that that's the only thing he's wanted to do, and he's worked a lot of his adult life, and actually, to be fair, even his younger teenage years, if you know his history, to become where he is now, and to become and be obsessed with how YouTube works and how YouTube is growing. So he did talk about the fact that it would legitimize it, and it would be in a position where you could have more creators go over to Netflix, Amazon, etc., to be in a position where they could get their own reality TV shows, and or the streaming platforms could see them as legitimate collaborators to create a show in that respect. They then touched on the fact that MrBeast actually doesn't like using CG in his videos, and he's constantly, and he's talked about this on other podcasts as well, he's constantly thinking about ways about either how do we scale that back, but also how can we maybe, he talked about maybe putting a Beast logo, so if they have extended a set and etc., that they can then show and communicate to the audience, or maybe putting timestamps in the description so that the audience will then know when CGI is being used, because it does open up a question related to the fact that, is that technically faking? Is that just increasing the production quality in that respect? And that's the conversation which was being had, and I think it's a really important point to be made, because he would rather do stuff for real, right? He spends a lot of money on building sets. He believes that he does things really, really well. So actually, you know, and there was a couple of, he didn't really refer to it as a mistake, but he did. When I was listening, I did feel like that's what he was talking about, which was in Beast Games, there's a single shot where a moat is added around the city that they built, and he was concerned or worried that it would have steamed that. It would have looked. The whole point was to clean it up, to draw your eye to the city. But the problem is, because you've added a moat in post, the question then becomes this: well, did you fake the whole city? And there is a couple of shots as well where you can see there's no moat there. So if he, I think, could go back, and he referred to the fact that he locked the edit of the actual episode before. Specifically, and it was kind of a decision made by an editor that maybe he wasn't consulted on, because he personally wouldn't have done it, but it was too late by the time he had locked the episode edit and etc. And that's how kind of these things, because they're massive behemoths when you work with people like Amazon, so he was slightly concerned of that, and it did sort of have a knock-on effect to how he was potentially using CG in his YouTube videos as well. They ended by asking Jimmy how he found going in and around India as the digital entertainment world. Jimmy shares how there is so many people who you've never even seen. There's a lot of fans as well, but there was kind of this conversation related to, firstly, there's a lot of creators in India who have majority Indian audiences, but they're huge in the respect to how many views they're pulling. So for example, if I refer to my notes, there's some creators who are pulling 20 million views, but it's mostly in India in that respect as well. But also the fan culture or the celeb culture that was taking place in India was, I think he found it kind of in some ways overwhelming, but also he really found it flattering because of the amount of people who have seen every video. Who they didn't announce that he was going to India, but it got out and he was greeted at the airport by his fans and that kind of thing. So I think it was really important, and he did talk about the fact that there is obviously some concern in regards to how much Indian creators can make, and how as the world progresses and it looks like their GDPR or their larger economy is growing. So he believes if Indian creators are listening or are looking to build channels and have larger channels, to think in 10-year terms in regards to how much you're making rather than necessarily 5 years or 2 years. And he wants to and he thought it was a really good thing, and he has actually noticed that a lot of his audience is in India as well, so there is obviously going to be opportunities there for him, and seeing and sort of sharing his knowledge from his Indian visit specifically. Then they also ended the show by asking Jimmy whether he would buy Hot Ones. For those who don't know, it's just been sold at the time of recording back from BuzzFeed to a set of investors, and also Sean Evans, who, as you may know, is the host of it, for $82 million in that respect. And Jimmy said, quote, "They should have called him. He would have loved to have helped and help to build the Hot Ones brand, and also with their sources up what they're doing there to help and articulate how he could potentially help them in that respect." And then following the question of would he go on Hot Ones, he thinks that's likely, even though he hates specifically or dislikes hot food, but he has also understood that people really enjoy watching him suffer. So that is all that we learned from the MrBeast interview, or the newest one specifically. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think that Jimmy has made the right call by maybe not talking about the controversy a little bit more, or is it going to be likely, as we discussed before, where those especially the lawsuits related to Beast Games is going to sort of disappear and never really go through the courts, because he's just going to kind of pay those people and pay for it to be settle out of court and that kind of thing, so then he could bring NDAs in, etc. Or was it actually interesting to hear his takes on some of those streaming conversations related to potential creators moving forward with potentially streaming platforms as well? I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below.